I want to express thanks to the Red Brick Museum and heartfelt appreciation to the Michael Werner Gallery for making this exhibition possible. Chinese culture had a profound influence on James Lee's work, to the point of his wearing a Chinese scholar's cap in respect of Lao Tzu. And like Mi Fu, James bowed to rocks. He used the clarity of the Diamond Sutra to describe his life, which was his work, like a dream, like a vision, like a bubble, like shadow, like dew, like lightning. Whereas most people would take a form and turn it into ideation, James would do the opposite. He would take an archetypal idea and turn it into form, discernible to intuition and consciousness. He often said that he had never done a perfect thing.
With Byars, there's a reductive language that you could compare to other artists working at the time, but I think what is different about him is the theatricality. It's quite explicit, and I think that's what connects him to boys. I think there's a way in which the work from that time often depended on the solidity. Byars is very different. That there's a scale change in Beijing. I'm thinking about the contrasts between the traditional art and architecture in the Forbidden City, and then the scale of the socialist monuments and architecture and the boulevards that in the sort of urban planning of Beijing that I think I could associate with Byars' language, and I think he would have been interested in showing his work there.
James Lee Byars was one of the most accessible of inaccessible artists. Behind the scarf that was blindfolding him, he could see everything. And he was a wonderful cheater because, he was looking through the scarf under the, you could see that he was looking down and see what he was doing and who was around him.
James Lee Byars is one of the most open-minded artists I've met, crossing culture, going from Egypt to Japan to Paris to Belgium to New York, and being across everything, challenging a kind of different kind of poetry, I would say, with an idea of beauty as well as vanities, so someone very important. He was 24, so it's about, 40 years ago minimum, and he was asking question and looking for question. At 24, able to call boys, but also an Indian fighter, also political person. He had no limits, and it's still so much about today. We are only trying to find the right questions. So I hope you do a fantastic show.
I met James Lee Byars with Marina Abramovic, early 90s, Venice Biennale. Pretty sure it was at Cafe Flor in Venice, on the Piazza San Marco. And Marina really celebrated the introduction. She paused, she paid respect, and I immediately knew that was one of the artists she really admired, and very special encounter. 10 years later, I installed Table of Perfect together with my colleague Roxana Makoch on the second floor at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and we studied all the different the specs, how the room has to be in an exact proportion, and the walls and everything. And when it was finally perfectly gilded and placed and completed, there was this moment of sublime presence, which was incredible.
James Lee Byars would love the idea of having an exhibition in Beijing. He never visited China, but in his heart and in his spirit and in his mind, he was deeply attached to Chinese philosophy, aesthetics, performance, art, and spirituality. He lived in Japan from 1958 until 1968 in Kyoto, where he became deeply engrossed in the practice of Zen Buddhism, in paper making, in calligraphy, in ritual, in no, and in various forms of temple practice. He could recite from the Tao Te Ching. He knew the Heart Sutra by heart. In 2009, I curated the exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum, The Third Mind, an exhibition exploring the impact and influence of Asian philosophy and art and aesthetics on American artists.
And Joe called me to say, James Lee is very ill. He collapsed, he's on the floor. And he's saying, let me die here, such a beautiful place, what a great place to die. So I got scared, and I think I was in the center of town, and I returned. By the time I returned, he was perfectly well. And Joe told me, he suddenly woke up and said, okay, please, Joe, come, let's walk around the park, let's look for the perfect stone. And that was the exercise.
Hello, my name is Massimiliano Gioni. I'm the artistic director of the new museum in New York, where I'm speaking from, in front of this wonderful piece by James Lee Byars called The Milky Way. One of my favorite works by James Lee Byars is called James Lee Byars Does the Holy Ghost. It was shown in Venice, in Piazza San Marco in 1975 on the occasion of the exhibition The Bachelor Machines, curated by Harald Zeman. It's a piece which consists in a gigantic silk effigy of a stick figure that gets unraveled in the Piazza San Marco. So it's a piece that requires the collective participations of bystanders and casual passersby. And so it's a piece that I think underscores the way in which James Lee Byars believed in collective participation in the attempt of acquiring a spiritual condition. So, as in many other sculptures by James Lee Byars, we are faced with an epiphany or a spiritual event, which is the result of a collective act of belief.
Congratulations to the Red Brick Museum for mounting this extraordinary show of James Lee Byars. James Lee would have been extraordinarily happy to be a part of this show in the country that philosophy and aesthetics were such a foundation of his work. I was fortunate enough to work with James Lee for many years and travel with him while he did exhibitions in the United States and Europe. Being with him was an extraordinary experience. He was and lived his work. Every single moment was an opportunity to look at things differently.
It's the perfect moment for Byars. He would be thrilled to make this exhibition in China. It's the perfect moment for everything. It's certainly for this time, for people in order to wake up, that the humanity has to wake up. It's the perfect moment. So what to say about Byars? That he had so many ideas. I had the impression that with every breath he would think, and that he had an idea. And that he could, and he was busy nearly 24 hours on 20. He slept a few hours,
James Lee Byars was a dear friend. He was often to be seen in the bars and the restaurants of Venice, where he hung out in his top hat and suitable gear. He came from an era when artists were still heroes. And somehow he carried the possibility of a deep belief in other cultures. He worked, as we know, of course, in Japan for many years. But Venice itself, of course, is a city in between, which is perhaps why he found it comfortable. Of course, he worked in Egypt and elsewhere, putting a lie to the idea that an artist must come from the culture in which he works. James Lee Byars' work looks to the esoteric, looks to the transcendent. For that, chapeau, my dear friend. I hope the show in China is going to be a huge success.
展览完美时刻是对拜尔斯一份吃到的、充满爱意的邀请。拜尔斯在50多年前就已深深地融入中国哲学、文化和艺术，他早已将东方智慧凝固在他的艺术作品中。他一直凝望，却没有机会踏上这片他非常热爱的土地。今天，拜尔斯作品终于第一次抵达中国，来到红砖美术馆。这将是拜尔斯与中国艺术界的和观众的一次神奇之旅。红砖美术馆的一切努力，都是为了迎接他的到来，完成他的夙愿。完美时刻是中国艺术界对拜尔斯的深情拥抱和一个完美之吻。